Hello, Trappers, and welcome back to another episode of the Trap NBA podcast. My name is Lewis, and joining me today is Ben, a fellow NBA fan, specifically a Milwaukee Bucks fan, and he is here today joining me to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks playoff picture, so to speak. So how the Bucks, the number one seed in the Eastern Conference and the best team in the NBA, how they could get through the Eastern Conference and make it to the NBA Finals. So we're going to go through each matchup, and just for the sake of this podcast, we're just going to assume that the higher seed always advances into the next round. But before we get into that, I will let Ben take over and introduce himself. So Ben, go ahead. Welcome to the show again, mate.
Mate, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
As good as you can be in these difficult times, I suppose. I'd also like it to be known that I'm also a fellow Brisbaneite with you boys. Happen to live 10 minutes down the road, and it's just a good geographical location, really.
It is. I was thinking about that before the show. I was like, he is in Brisbane. So I'm glad that you brought that up because we got to look out for each other. You know, the bigger cities like Sydney and Melbourne always like to tend that they that's where it's at, but that's not true. Brisbane's a good city, and so I'm glad that we can support other Brisbaneites.
100%.
But yeah, these difficult times. How are you facing in these this coronavirus situation? It's obviously hit everyone in different perspectives and different ways. But we've sort of spoke about it on previous podcasts. But you individually, are you holding up okay?
Yeah, as good as you can, mate. Look, I've still got a job. Other than that, on my weekends, I'm just spending a lot of time grinding on my career in 2K. It's about as exciting as it's getting in my place.
Yeah, I've just touch on 2K. Did you watch the 2K tournament at all?
No.
No, neither did I. I don't know if many people did. Did you watch the horse tournament?
I saw highlights of it. It looked really boring. That sort of stuff just doesn't translate to TV. Like, that'd be cool in real life, to watch that in real life, but that sort of stuff doesn't thrill me watching it on a stream.
Yeah, no, I agree. 2K though, I haven't got a console anymore. Ironically, I sold it just before I went away, and then when I get home, the whole world turns to shit. And everyone's online, and now I don't have a bloody console to play. So apparently 2K20 is not that good.
Oh, look, it's the same old. The game really hasn't changed since about 2K15. And what shits people, including myself, is the microtransactions. If you want to pay to win, you can. Which then means that people like myself who don't play to win get left behind and get smashed online, because I'm sitting there with an 85 rated overall guy, and I get scored against some 99 level guy who's put $100 into the machine. So, yeah,
that's fair. I will say that fellow host and friend of mine, Gianni Micco, he always grinds. He never, I don't know if, in fact, he might do the microtransactions, but I know he grinds until he gets that player up until like the highest possible rating.
And you know what? If you do grind to get a 99, fair call. But for the people who are 99 on like the second day of release, like,
yeah, but that would just ruin the fun of it, wouldn't it? Really, essentially. So
100%.
You always playing as the Bucks. Your player, I assume he's playing for the Bucks.
Well, this particular build I've got, I won the title with the Bucks, and the Bucks screwed me over with the second contract, so I left. So I'm going to play with Doncic because that's just as exciting as well.
Wow, so you're going to forecasting the future for Giannis is going to happen there, or?
Absolutely not.
No, I didn't think so. Anyway, let's get into the Bucks and well, in fact, first we'll rewind the film. And how are you holding up about no NBA? It's pretty disappointing, right?
Look, when the news first came out, so I'll set the scene. I was at my former podcast host Matt's house. He was getting married the next day, and the news came out about Rudy Gobert, and we were watching. I think it was actually Dallas Atlanta. I think it might have been. And I was saying to him, look, this is perfect timing for the Bucks. The last 3 games before the season got suspended, we'd lost 3 games in a row, and Giannis actually had a grade 1 ligament sprain in his knee. So I thought, oh yeah, if you take a month off, Giannis will come back fully healthy, and we'll have a red hot go at this. Now, I didn't foresee this. At that stage, it still was a we'll be right sort of mentality by the whole world. And in the space of about a week, that got turned to, holy shit, we're all in trouble. So, look, when it first came out, I was really okay with it because I thought, you beauty, we'd have a break. But now here we are, 2 months later, and with no NBA in sight,
Yeah,
it's quite concerning, to be honest.
yeah, I suppose not even just from a sport aspect, but just we literally, it seems like the whole world is on lockdown and nothing can do anything. But yeah, I agree. It has been strange considering, for me at least, when I went over to Germany, it was really hard to watch basketball because the time difference was so obscure. So games would start at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. So I was always catching up on games the next day in a shortened version. Whereas you get home, I'm like, yep, all right, good, just in time for the playoffs. Get to actually sit down and watch these games, and then all of a sudden, it's all over Red Rover. And from a fan's perspective, it's obviously super disappointing that we not only don't get to see the season get played out, but we're probably not going to get a playoffs either. Do you see that happening too, or am I just being too naive?
Honestly, if we just take a step back, I know this isn't a political podcast, but if you take a step back and look at it, like America's numbers for coronavirus are just through the roof. I cannot see any future where we're getting back this season. I think this season's lost, and to be honest, I think there'll be a fair chunk of next season lost as well. America's out of control right now, and unfortunately, it just happens to be where our favourite sport is being played. So until they get themselves under control, it's really not safe to be putting these players back on the court, and that's got to be the number one priority.
Yeah, I agree with you. And then you get the whole hypotheticals of saying, okay, well, they're going to do them in training, training facilities, and all the players are going to stay in one hotel room. But to me, that just seems like. Have you ever seen like the movie Quarantine? And they get locked in the apartment block and the whole zombie like.
No, I haven't seen that one.
Okay, well, it just sort of reminds me of that. Like they get all possible. Even though I know at the moment that it seems like there are no NBA players who have, got the coronavirus, or at least they've, overcome the symptoms of it. But, they're still running the risk. We don't know if any NBA player or associated people of teams have been out and socializing, so to speak, when maybe they shouldn't have. And you just never know with these situations. And then, again, not to get too political, but you see all the people whinging and complaining for the right reasons, that there's not enough testing and stuff like that. But
well, just to touch on that, if you have NBA games, I listened to Nate Duncan's pod. He's got a pod now specifically for COVID-19, and what he was saying is, if you want to run a league, you're going to have to test every player and every person on their staff before every game. Now, that's hundreds of tests a day that could be used at the hospitals. Yeah. And I can 100% see that being backlash at that, because he's right. That's just irresponsible for the NBA.
Yeah, that's what I was going to refer to, is the fact that they would have to test these players and other people too every day. And like you said, it's hundreds of tests which could be going to the public health.
100%.
So yeah. Anyway, but bit of a tangent there, but to get into these hypothetical players that we're going to get into, are you disappointed as a Bucks fan, considering this is the best Bucks team maybe ever?
Look, it's an interesting point you do make. I might argue that last season was better, but we can get into that in a second. Look, mate, I am thoroughly disappointed. If this was not our year, we're at least going to be coming close, and we definitely had a shot. And if this season is a dud, then that's one less season we'll have with Giannis to possibly win a title. And if he is to leave in free agency next off season, well, then that's one less season where we can win a title. So 100%, I'm rather salty right now.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So anyway, we can hypothetically predict that the Bucks are going to make the finals in this podcast here. So, like I discussed earlier, we're going to discuss each round Milwaukee finds themselves in and their opponent. We're going to give reasonings and predictions to why we believe that team can win that series. So, I might not agree that the Bucks are going to make it out of the first round. Spoiler alert, they are going to, but we can we can discuss that throughout the podcast. So we will sort of briefly touch on if they make it to the finals. whether we think that they can beat one of the Western Conference powerhouses like the Lakers or the Clippers, or maybe there's someone else that you might think. But we won't really dive into that because we're specifically focused on the Eastern Conference here and the Milwaukee Bucks. So, and like I said off the bat, we're going to assume, for the sake of this podcast, that every higher seed advances into the next round, and we're taking the seedings from the end, or from when the Rudy Gobert game happened and the NBA shut down. So let's kick things off with the first round, with obviously the number 1 seed being the Milwaukee Bucks versus the number 8 seed, the Orlando Magic. Did they just scrape 30 games? Is that right?
They finished 30 and 35, but they were a full 6 games ahead of ninth place Wizards. So to give you an idea on how weak the Eastern Conference was this year.
Yeah,
the highest with the Bucks leading the entire league. But then you had the Magic, who were 5 games below 500, comfortably making the playoffs.
In their second season in a row too. So good on the Magic.
Sure. As a Bucks fan, where we finished 8th for a solid decade, I can tell you now it's not something you really want to aspire to.
But after the whole Dwight Howard trade and everything like that, good for them for at least getting into the playoffs and getting those extra 4 games, because that's all they're playing in this scenario is 4 games. They're not winning any game. Do you see the Orlando Magic stealing a game from the Milwaukee Bucks like they did last season against the Toronto Raptors on the DJ Augustine buzzer beater?
Look, to be honest, we saw this matchup last year, and it was Milwaukee-Detroit, and we ended up dusting them 4-0 with a plus-minus of plus 101 for the series. This would be a repeat of that. I can't see Orlando doing anything in any of the games. Milwaukee will trounce them in Milwaukee. They'll be dejected by the time they get back to Orlando. They'll be down 2-0. And guys like Brook Lopez are just going to feast, because their big man, Nikola Vucevic, is quite a good interior defender, but he can't defend out on the perimeter, which is where Brook is, and Brook shoots. And I can just see Milwaukee's role players destroying Orlando, and then you'll have Khris and Giannis taking over. So honestly, it's 4-0, and if you gun to my head, you want another result, maybe it's 4-1 if they just scrape out a lucky win. But it's not going more than 5. 100%.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't see any scenario where the Orlando Magic win this series, unless Markelle Fultz somehow turns into the number 1 draft pick that he was all those years ago, and you just never know. Would this be his first go in the playoffs? Obviously, he was with the team last season, but did he get a run with the Magic last season in the playoffs? I'm not sure.
I don't know. Sorry.
No, I don't.
I think he may have. I think he may have played like a few minutes for Philadelphia the year before when they made it.
Yes, I apologize. They started him for some odd reason. That's right.
Yes, he played 3 games, averaging 7 minutes and 1 point per game.
I tell you what, he's certainly turned his career around. So good on Markelle. But
good for him.
Orlando does have a top 10 defense, but they also do have a bottom 10 offense. Does the defense strike any fear into you as a Bucks fan, or should it strike any fear into you? They got some guys that can throw at Giannis. No. I mean, Aaron Gordon maybe. If Al-Farouq Aminu was there, but he's out for the season, at least slow Giannis.
Look, if you wanted to play a slow Giannis, that would be Jonathan Isaac, but he tore his MCL midway through the season. So.
Oh yeah, there's another guy that they maybe could have thrown at him too. Yeah, look, I agree with you. I don't see any sort of reason to blabber on about the Orlando Magic possibly trying to upset the Milwaukee Bucks.
Definitely not.
So we both say the Milwaukee Bucks win this series. What are we going to say? 4-0? A clean sweep?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on to the second round after they beat the Orlando Magic, and they're going to play the number 4 seed Miami Heat, who would play the Indiana Pacers in the first round. But again, for the sake of this podcast, we're just going to assume that Miami Heat have won that series. See, now this gets interesting, this series, because the Heat beat the Bucks on both occasions this season. Once in overtime and the other time by 16 points. And both teams almost have an identical offensive rating. So are you as concerned as I maybe would be?
Look, I did some research for this particular matchup, and I did the research actually based on Philly making 5th. I didn't realize that they'd been pipped for 5th by the Pacers. Because what I was going to say is, even if Philadelphia beat Miami, I believe both games are going to 7 because Philly are the sort of team where they would actually take us to 7. But if we're speaking about Miami, I also believe Miami would take us to 7. I could honestly see the first game of those playoffs actually beating us in game 1, them winning their 2 games in Miami, and us actually going into game 5 down 3-1. That's when someone like Giannis takes over and says, I'm not losing in the second round. And then he would come up big, and I reckon we would ultimately beat Jimmy Butler and the Heat in 7 games.
Wow, so you're saying a 3-1 comeback prediction. Wow.
That's what I honestly reckon, because if you look at those games during the regular season, we didn't take Miami seriously. We versed them in like the first week and lost in overtime. And that second game where we lost comfortably, apparently there was reports the guys were out on the nightlife the night before. As everyone says, Miami nightlife is undefeated, and on this instance, that was the case.
Yes, indeed. Well, this is the playoffs. It is different from a November. When was that game when they lost by 16? It was sometime in March or something, wasn't it? It was only recently.
It was in March the 2nd.
I mean, the playoffs are a different animal. Maybe they're taking it a little easier in Miami come to playoff time. But I don't know. I think the guard matchup could be kind of interesting in this series because you and I have both seen Bledsoe struggle in the postseason, and I think Dragic has been pretty good this season, even though he's been relatively banged up the past 2 seasons. He is having an effective season coming off the bench, and maybe he does get slotted into that starting lineup for the playoffs. So I think the guard matchup at least could be interesting. It does does Bledsoe outplay Dragic or what happens? Do you think? I don't know. I think that's an interesting matchup.
I think you're looking at the wrong matchup there. Dragic, Bledsoe, I don't think that's going to matter too much. The matchup will be they'll have Bam, Jimmy Butler, and Andre Iguodala all run rotation so that they can play on Giannis.
I did have that written down.
The other guy will be on Khris. So they've got 3. Andre Iguodala is probably not an all-star right now, but the other 2, certainly Jimmy and Ben, they've got 2 all-stars they can put on our 2 all-stars, which then effectively cancels them out, and then it'll be whether our role players can step up or not.
Yeah, well, you also forget they got Jay Crowder too, who's a respectable defender.
Yeah, 100%.
So, they've got a lot of guys that they can throw it. Yeah, obviously, I think ultimately Giannis still averages some ridiculous numbers, but maybe they just slow him down a bit. And this is where the conversation of him, even though I do think he has developed some form of a jump shot, but this is where those conversations arise from, right? When, a team like Miami had a bunch of really solid defenders and really just bulky dudes like Crowder, Iguodala, Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler to throw at Giannis. So does his jump shot ultimately help them beat Miami, do you think?
It depends what you mean. Where I've had this discussion with Matt 1,000 times. I don't believe he needs a jump shot like the rest of the world thinks he needs a jump shot, in the sense that everyone says he needs a 3-point shot. If you look at the superstars in the league, not everyone has a 3-point shot, but the superstars all have that mid-range shot that they can rely on. Kawhi Leonard won a title last year by coming off that screen and shooting from mid-range. Kevin Durant won 2 titles with Golden State being able to do that. LeBron James has developed a mid-range. That's something that Giannis is developing, and if you look at his shot map, he is starting to develop something around that sort of 10, 15-foot mark, which is something that he does need. And in a matchup like this, I agree with you. That is something that he would need to have, or he would struggle.
Yeah, it is interesting. I ultimately think that the Bucks make it out of this series, but not sure if I agree with the coming down from 3-1. That I honestly, I'm going to have to say if they were down 3-1, I think the Miami Heat would finish them up in 5 or even 6.
Well, look, it's got to be said. My reasoning for this is I've been watching, I don't know if you've got League Pass, but League Pass is playing all these old games at the moment. And one of the games I watched recently was LeBron's game against the Celtics in 2012. I think it was before he'd won a title. It was in Boston, and he was down 3-2. So if Boston went at home, Boston go through the finals.
Yeah.
And LeBron pulls out that
45
and 12 game or whatever it was.
Yeah, that's an infamous one. He doesn't. His face doesn't move.
It's the Boston fans have got signs calling him a little bitch up in the stadium. He hasn't won a title
Yeah.
in 9 seasons in the league, and that was his time where he said, "Yep, this is my league," and he won that game and ultimately won the title that year. My thought process was Giannis would be down 3-1, possibly 3-2 going into Miami, and then he pulls out one of those games. That's my thought process from that.
It's fair enough. I'm going to say the Milwaukee Bucks win in 6, but it could be 7 as well. I don't think they could, by any chance, let the Miami Heat get a game advantage on them. I just feel like the Heat are a team, and especially Jimmy Butler, this guy, if they see any chance to possibly beat the Bucks and advance, I just can't see them losing. Yeah, but you know what? I could be wrong. I probably am wrong, but I ultimately think the Bucks win in 6 or 7 without giving up a game advantage to the Miami Heat. So I'm going to agree with you here and say that the Milwaukee Bucks advance to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they would play the Toronto Raptors. Whether we agree with that or not, I don't know. But in this scenario, that's who they're playing. They're playing a rematch of the Eastern Conference Finals last season, where Toronto pretty much just won 4 in a row, didn't they?
So if you look back at those games, we were up 2-0, and Nick Nurse made a change, and he put Kawhi on Giannis. And after that, we didn't win a game. In this matchup, there is no change-up to put the best defender in the league on Giannis, and ultimately, I think the Bucks would win in 5. And to be honest, I'm quite glad that you did it this way, because I think the Celtics would be a far harder matchup for us. But if you're saying Toronto's our matchup, I'm very confident we could beat them more easily than we beat Miami.
That is interesting. Why? Let's just sort of talk. I mean, obviously they're playing Toronto in this situation, but why do you think Boston would be a more feared opponent than Toronto?
So Boston have 2 of the best young wings in the league, and this is a league dominated by wings. So they have Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, which will be a constant threat. You then have a guy like Kemba Walker who can shoot like mad from deep. So they've got 3 guys you consistently have to worry about. At the Raptors, they only have 2. They've got Pascal and Kyle Lowry, who are both awesome in their own right, but I just can't see that third guy that we would have to worry about. Now, everyone talks about this as a three banana league. You need that third banana. The Bucks only have 2 in this instance. We only have Khris and Giannis. They're probably the best 2 big bananas, I would argue, because Giannis is MVP and Khris has had I consider, an All-NBA season. But if you add that third player that needs to be concerned with, as we said, Bledsoe has shat the bed 2 years in a row. Is he good enough to guard Kemba? Is Giannis going to have enough steam left to guard Tatum? Is Khris going to be able to guard Jaylen Brown? That's why I think Boston would ultimately take us to 7, and I think that we could beat Boston in 7. But I would think that if it's Toronto, I think that we do them in 5 because they don't have Kawhi to turn to, and that's ultimately going to be the difference.
Yeah, no, I see every point that you're making. I don't like to say it, but it is really hard to put your finger on the Toronto Raptors. I know, the NBA universe and the analytics or the stat people love to say that they're really as good, if not better, than they were last season.
I just strongly disagree with that. If they asked Nick Nurse around All-Star playoffs what he wanted to add to his team, and he didn't say it outright, but he said basically, if you could add one person to this team, who would it be? And he basically said Kawhi. And unfortunately, that's what they're missing. They're missing an out-and-out superstar from this team.
Do you think Siakam is...
I believe Siakam is a very good player. Obviously, he was a starting All-Star. But is he a Finals MVP? I don't think so.
Okay, that's fair enough. What about the depth of each team? I know the Bucks are deep, but the Toronto Raptors are also very deep, and they do, rely on their bench quite a bit, and we've seen them, heat up. We saw Fred VanVleet last season, especially in the finals, just tear a hole in the Golden State Warriors, and sometimes when those players just get hot, there's really sometimes just no answer for them. Do you worry about maybe some of those role players, like I know Norman Powell has been playing really good for them this season. Siakam is obviously an all-star starter. Is he a superstar? Maybe that's up for discussion. Kyle Lowry is hot and cold, but what happens if he gets hot? Again, obviously they don't have the Danny Greens like they used to, but they're still a really good team. They're obviously, I think it's different because they rely, throughout the season they've relied on a guy, Terrence Davis, who has been a really good rookie and a guy that they can rely on. But obviously that all depends and changes throughout, the playoffs. But do you think maybe, say, it is just, let's just hypothetically say that it is Giannis and Khris just doing Giannis and Khris things, but the 80% rest of the Milwaukee Bucks are playing under par, but on the other hand, the Raptors, their whole unit is cohesively playing well. Do you think maybe then, if it turned to be maybe a 2-on-7 matchup in terms of player wise, are you sort of worried then, or are you still confident that Giannis and Khris could ultimately beat a deep Toronto Raptor team, despite if in this scenario the bench unit and the role players aren't playing up to par?
Look, I see what you're trying to say there, but ultimately, the Milwaukee Bucks are one of the deepest team in the competition. So,
they are, and these two teams are maybe the two deepest teams in the competition.
But we have the superstar that they don't. They have two All-Stars. We have an All-Star and an MVP. I ultimately think that's the kicker here. I just want to go back to your Fred VanVleet. I know Fred VanVleet torched Golden State, but if you have a look at his numbers against us, for the entire series against the Bucks, he averaged 57 from 3 against us, and the last 3 games he averaged 82% from 3, and that was off 17 makes. 17 attempts. So when you're saying, do I remember VanVleet, mate, we have nightmares about Fred VanVleet.
He's a fun little player. I love Fred VanVleet. He could be my favorite player in the NBA. Actually, he is so much fun to watch.
Well, look, he's about to become real expensive, and I don't know if Toronto can take him back, because he's about to. What do you pay VanVleet? He's been awesome this season.
Yes, he's been really awesome. Maybe is he a starting point guard in the NBA?
Yeah, averaging 18.7 assists, 100%. 100% he is.
It's interesting. It's so interesting, these sort of players that are so good off the bench, or have that potential to be maybe a starting point guard, but then say we've seen it happen multiple times. So we've seen it. Brandon Jennings, there was all that talk when in his first couple of seasons, he's the next big thing, Obviously, injuries got in the way of that, but they just don't translate into other roles. When he went to Detroit, even though he did have a good season in Detroit and injuries got in the way, it just didn't translate. Reggie Jackson's other one went from Oklahoma City as a guy people looking at and saying, okay, he could be a starting point guard in the league. Didn't work out. Again, injuries. I wonder if maybe his role in Toronto is better suited for him, and I'm not sure. Not sure.
100%. I think Nick Nurse gets the most out of all of these guys. And just going back to a previous point, 100%, they are as deep as you can get. But I just don't think that the Bucks are the team to worry about depth. We also have depth. And in this instance, I think that they are one Kawhi short of beating us.
No, that's a fair point. Just thinking about the dynamic that Siakam and in the situation that he is in now, being an all-star, and Kawhi could have, tangibly brought against the Bucks, then yes, maybe I would agree that the Raptors could, beat the Bucks again in 2 years straight. But I don't see it. Serge Ibaka, is a guy. Marcus Gasol is another guy that are really sort of good defenders, but I don't think. I don't see the Raptors beating the Bucks. Let's just be honest. I would say they might win 1 or 2 games, and ultimately I'm going to say the Bucks win in 6.
Okay. Yeah. Look, I said 5, but I could be convinced to go 6. I don't think they take us to 7.
No, I think out of those 3 rounds, the Miami Heat would certainly be the toughest one. However, I do want to sort of talk about, is there a team that we haven't spoken about in the playoffs that the Bucks faced that you would be super concerned about? We sort of talked about the Celtics, but everyone sort of pinpoints the 76ers. How do you feel about them?
I think a Philly matchup would be extremely tough, but if you look at their results this year, they were 29-2 at home and 10-24 away from home. Literally, there are teams like the Knicks were 10-23 away from home, so they were as bad as the Knicks were away from home, but then they were the best team in the league at home. In a matchup where we have home court advantage, I honestly think it would be Bucks in 7 because I think everyone just wins their home games. They are so bad away from home, but at home you then see that they have all this talent, and I certainly think that we would struggle to win a game at Philly. But in a series where you have home court advantage, that's not going to be a problem. If you look at their team, they are easily the second most talented team in the East, and some might even argue they're more talented than Milwaukee. And it would be a difficult argument to say otherwise. However, their regular season is 39-26. Now that's championship caliber numbers. So ultimately, I think it comes down to Brett Brown. I don't think he's able to get the best out of Philadelphia. And I honestly think he's going to get fired at the end of the season, which would be good for the Boomers because it means he can focus more on Australian basketball.
I think that the Bucks would make it all the way through the East Conference final, all the way through the East Conference playoffs. Generally, comfortably, I think maybe the teams that they could run into would be the 76ers or the Miami Heat, or in your case, you point out the Boston Celtics. So really, there are 3 teams there that are still at least worth getting worried about. You know what I mean?
Yes, I look 100%, but it's the playoffs. If you're not worried about the playoffs, then there's something really wrong with the league. You got to beat the best to be the best. And I don't think the East would be a cakewalk. People say that the East is shit. The East is actually quite good up the top. The top 6 teams would challenge anyone in the West. Maybe not Indiana, but certainly the top 5 teams minus Indiana could challenge anyone in the West. But ultimately, I think Giannis and co would shine through, and I think that they'll be versing whoever you believe, which you'll go through in another podcast, would verse them in the West.
Yes. We will get through to the Western Conference playoff scenario all in due time here at the Trap NBA podcast. And you know what? Maybe with Ben here again. Who knows? We'll see what happens with the future with us. You briefly wanted to mention to me earlier that you wanted to talk about the Bucks season and their award nominees or maybe winners. Go ahead, talk about the Milwaukee Bucks and how you think. I see you on Twitter all the time, raging. You're a passionate Bucks fan, I will say. You're a big Khris Middleton fan, and you know what? I agree with you. He is criminally underrated, and he could be possibly as good as Klay Thompson. That's what I'm going to say. But tell me, you as a very passionate, aggressive Bucks fan, talk to me through why you think these guys are award nominees, if not winners.
Okay, so I've got a few nominees here. I think someone like a Dante DiVincenzo, he's not going to get in the running, but someone like him is probably going to be top 5 or top 10 in terms of vote getters for most improved. The man was an absolute zero last year. And he's come out and he actually got that starting spot on a team that was going to win 60 plus, maybe even 70 games. And he averaged almost 10 points a game and showed amazing energy on defense. I think he's a future all-defensive player. So I think he is someone to look at for the future. And I think if he continues on this upward trajectory, we'll be talking about him for most improved next year as well, because the man's got talent. If we want to talk about actual vote getters, I think there's 3 main people to talk about. Last year, Eric Bledsoe got a all-defensive nod. I think maybe he'll get it again this year, but the guy I want to get on an all-defensive ballot is Brook Lopez. I don't know what you think of him, but I think he is honestly a top 5 defender in the league. If you watch how he defends, his drop coverage is incredible, and it's one of the reasons why we've been back-to-back top defense in the league. So I would like to see him at least all second defensive team, perhaps even all first.
Brook Lopez has certainly changed his game. You know what I mean? Like there was a time when he was playing for the Lakers in Brooklyn where he wasn't a good defender, but now all of a sudden he's been slotted into a system where he's been maybe surrounded by other good defenders and put into a system which really utilizes him, but he has become quite a good defender, if not a great defender. I'm a big Lopez Brothers fan, but Brook Lopez in particular, the way he's developed his game into being a sharpshooter, what do they call him?
Splash Mountain.
And a very, very solid defender. I really hope he does get an all-defensive nod.
And the thing that shits me was one of the games, I can't remember who it was against, but it was one of the games, it was about February, it was one of the last games before the season got suspended ultimately. But Mark Jackson was doing the NBA telecast, and the camera panned across to the Lopez brothers at a timeout, and he was saying how they're having a lot of fun playing together. And if Brook Lopez could be better defensively, he might actually be able to play on a championship-winning team, because he said that Robin Lopez was the better defender. And that really annoyed me, because that just shows that these ESPN guys really don't care about Milwaukee, because clearly he hasn't watched a single game. We've just talked about how Brook Lopez could be a top 10 defensive player in the league if he gets this nod for All-NBA. And here's this NBA analyst, apparently, who clearly hasn't watched a Bucks game in the last 2 years, saying that Robin Lopez is still the best defender. I know that's just a rant I wanted to get off my chest, because that really annoyed me. Robin Lopez is a good defender, but Brook Lopez is one of the best defenders in the league.
I know a lot of people do have problems with the ESPN telecast, especially when there's, Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson going on the call. See, I can already hear it. However, it is tough to say, because you're right. Brook Lopez is clearly the better defender, and Mark Jackson is going off reputation here. There was a time where Robin Lopez maybe was the better defender, or at least was made out to be the better defender. Whereas now it's the tables have turned. Whereas I think it's hard for these. I'm not trying to cut them any slack or anything. I think they're there for entertainment purposes more so than analytical purposes. You know what I mean?
Sadly, I know exactly what you mean. And you're right, that's exactly what it's come into. And that's a real shame. I don't know if you watch any NFL, but they have some fantastic analysts on there. And that's something I'd like to see the NBA invest in, is past players who actually know what they're talking about.
They toyed with the idea of players only, but that was just horrible.
Yeah. Now, players only is just famous players. I'm talking about getting guys like Brian Scalabrine and these lesser named players who actually know what they're talking about. Bring them on and get them to talk from their point of view. Guys like Reggie Miller just shit me. They have no idea what they're talking about.
Scalabrine's on the Boston Celtics call. He's really good, actually. I agree. Everything you said about those sort of color commentators, and I suppose you could even file them under the category of entertainment commentators now. I think, obviously they have some form of idea. I think what bothers people the most about this is specifically you, not to put words in your mouth or anything, but the fact that, you mentioned that this guy is a paid analyst, whatever.
Analyst.
He gets paid to talk about, and he's, jeez, it's getting really hot in this room, man. I tell you, I need a water. And here we are talking about how Brook Lopez is, arguably a top 10 defender in the NBA, whereas he, a former head coach of, how many teams? 2? 1?
Yeah, I think 1.
Just the Warriors, just 1. But always in contention for another job, it seems like. And I think what annoys people is the fact that these guys are meant to know more about basketball than you and I talking on a microphone in, Brisbane, Australia. I think that's what bothers people about the commentators, is the fact that these guys are not only getting paid to what they do, but the fact that they're ex-players, sometimes ex-coaches, and they should have a better understanding on who's the better defender out of the Lopez brother. That's what is annoying people more so than the fact that they're getting it wrong.
100%.
Give me an argument to why Khris Middleton should be All-NBA third team.
Well, who says he's not second? No, I'm kidding.
No, it was on the tip of my tongue to say second. I was like, do I say second? Do I say second? And I was like, no, I'll just say third.
I've got my forwards here for All NBA. I haven't got guards or centers. I've just done forwards here for the sake of this argument. So if we get the first and second teams out of the way, there's 3 guys on this third team who you can discuss. So first team will be LeBron James and Giannis. I don't think we need to argue about that. They're the top 2 for MVP, which therefore makes them 1 and 2 in All-NBA voting. All-NBA second team, I think it'll be Kawhi and AD. People could argue AD was a center, but if you watch the Lakers, he hasn't played center at all. Dwight Howard and JaVale have played a lot of minutes next to him, so I think he has to be considered as a forward, so I think that's your All-NBA second team. Okay, so then All-NBA third team comes down to 3 guys. It's Khris Middleton, Jimmy Butler, and Jason Tatum. Now, I think Jimmy is probably the first guy picked out of those 2. Jimmy's had an incredible season, incredible on defense and on offense. And he's led the Miami Heat to a rather surprising top 4 finish. I don't think many people expected Miami to be in the top 4 this year, and he's done that by himself alone. Bam's had a really good year, but I think ultimately they don't get there without Jimmy. So I think Jimmy is your consensus first guy. And then it comes down to Middleton and Tatum. Now, Tatum has better offensive stats, but Khris has far better defensive stats, and he's played on a far better team where he has ultimately carried the Bucks when Giannis hasn't been there. If you look at Chris's stats when Giannis isn't there, he's averaging like 25 points a game. So people saying he's being carried by Giannis, it's not actually correct. He's awesome when Giannis is there, and he actually elevates to being a borderline NBA starter, All-Star starter when Giannis isn't there. So ultimately, I think Khris gets the nod over Tatum for being an all-rounder rather than Tatum's just pure offensive stats.
No, that is fair enough because he scored 50 when Giannis wasn't playing against the Wizards. Is that right?
That he did. He went toe-to-toe with Bradley Beal, which is no small feat. Bradley Beal's a very good player. And ultimately, Khris won the night because Khris just went supernova.
I actually believe you. I think Jason Tatum's going to get there more than 10 times in his career. And I think with the way the Bucks season has gone, they were at least challenging for 70 games up until they lost 3 in a row towards when the season abruptly ended. I think the voters, and at least I would award that too. And I would look at Khris Middleton, his stats. Like you said, even though, Tatum has had the better offensive year, you got to look at the bigger picture here. And Khris Middleton is a huge reason to why the Bucks are as successful as they are.
Mm-hmm. It's lazy for people to say that the Bucks don't have a second star. Because if you go back 3 seasons, sure, Khris was not at that level. But this season, Khris has elevated himself. The man averaged 21 points a game on 50, 40, 90.
That's only been done by 2 or 3 or a very small amount of players before, right?
So Brogdon did it last year on 15 points a game, and that was a big deal. So the fact that Khris can do it on 21 points a game, it's not being talked about nearly enough.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was saying the players who have done it on 20 points a game, the 50, 40, 90.
Yeah.
There's only been like 2 or 3 or maybe even 4, I don't know.
Not many.
There's been less than 5, that's for sure. So
yeah, 100%.
I certainly do think that Khris Middleton deserves an All-NBA nod. And you know what? Good for him, because a lot of people were bashing him when the Bucks signed him to that monster contract last season, and he's lived up to it. And he's not a sexy name, he's not a sexy pick, but he's a sexy player. He's a sexy player.
You know what? We'll see it in about half an hour when we watch this Michael Jordan special. But Scottie Pippen was not a special name at the time. He was a guy who people said, "Oh, look, he's all right," but Michael Jordan carries him. But if you talk about him now, everyone talks about Scottie Pippen as this Hall of Fame player and an amazing. He would have gone well by himself. And ultimately, I think that's what Khris Middleton is. I think he can be a Scottie Pippen. He is absolutely the best player to put next to Giannis because he doesn't need the ball. He doesn't take the ball. He doesn't have a big attitude problem. He's a guy who will just put up points, efficient points, as we just talked about, and he complements Giannis perfectly.
That's quite a high feat. And for the sake of you and the Bucks organization, I really hope he lives up to those somewhat lofty expectations.
Me too, mate.
That's for sure.
Me too.
Ben, I think that about does it for us here. Is there anything else you want to add to the great Milwaukee Bucks vine we've discussed?
The only other thing I did want to add was the other award we were going to talk about, and I think that's Giannis winning MVP. I think if the season had gone on a bit longer and Giannis had remained out while LeBron continued to build a claim, I certainly think that LeBron was onto something there. But when with the league stopping when it did, I think Giannis was just way too far in front.
Yeah, that's interesting because I guess I glossed over because I certainly think Giannis is going to win the MVP. I think it was unanimous up until LeBron sort of started to take over there and Giannis went down with that awkward leg injury. That is interesting because even though, say Giannis missed a month and LeBron still went on his set, I still kind of think Giannis would have won regardless.
So I honestly think in my heart Giannis was going to be the MVP. However, LeBron was the sexy story. He was the man who has, he's revived the Lakers, which is by far and away the most popular team in the league. He also has only won 4 MVPs, which is a travesty because he should have won more earlier. But that shouldn't come into count when you're doing modern day voting. But of course it would, and I think that would have been factored in. But the fact is, because the season ended when it did, I don't think you can vote for anyone other than Giannis.
I think it is going to be Giannis. It's not going to be unanimous as it maybe once was when the season started. But when you think about it and you look through each conference, like the West and the East, you look at the Eastern Conference player and the Western Conference player, not of the month, but just in general, and you say, okay, well, it was the beginning of the season, it was Giannis and Luka, or Giannis and Harden, or Giannis and LeBron, or maybe even for some people it was Giannis and Jokic. Who's going to be the MVP? The common person there is Giannis. So I think ultimately you got to sort of think of that and say Giannis has been good from day dot, and he's been talked about as the MVP from the beginning of the season. So I think you don't have to give it to him, but I think he is going to win it just because of that reason. He's just been the MVP. He's the best player on the best team. So anyway, is there anything else before we go that you want to touch on? We've spoken about the Bucks' hypothetical scenario leading into the NBA Finals, and we both agree if they were versing the teams that we discussed, which were the Orlando Magic, the Miami Heat, and the Toronto Raptors East Conference Finals, we both agreed that they would get to the NBA Finals and put up a fight, if not win the NBA championship, but we'll get to that another time, and I'm sure we'll get you back on the podcast to discuss that. You know what? Maybe when the season resumes, if it resumes, that's me being naive, we can get you back on, talk about the Bucks' real chance to win a championship. But is there anything else you'd like to add to this?
No, look, I think we can save it for another time, but there's obviously, once the season is officially cancelled, which I think is going to be a when, not if, unfortunately. But when that does happen, the question will then turn to what's Giannis doing, and I think we can save that for another podcast because we could spend hours talking about what he's going to do.
We can indeed, and like you said, you didn't in 2K. The Bucks shafted you, man. They didn't give you a good contract, so you left to go join Luka in Dallas. So maybe I feel like you're forecasting something there. There's something in me.
Look, if it goes to Dallas, then I'm going to be starting to put money into sports bet then because maybe I am Nostradamus.
That about wraps it up here for us, Ben and I, at least, at the Trap NBA podcast. Ben, I'm sure you'll be a major part of us moving forward as we are pushing as much content out as we possibly can. So we'd love to have you back on the show as many times as possible. So I hope you're staying safe out there, mate, and all the best. I guess go Bucks for your sake.
Thanks, mate. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, you bet. Take care.